Hey, what's up, everyone? It's been forever since I've been on YouTube, but I wanted to dive back in sort of a big way and tackle a pretty complicated, confusing, often convoluted topic. And it's the question of whether or not Darth Maul, son of Dathomir, is part of both the EU and the new Disney canon. And the answer is yes, it's actually part of both. I've been having a lot of conversations with people about this. Interestingly, like unconnected, distinct conversations. Something about this is bubbling up again. Maybe it's the fact that, with the recent announcement that the Clone Wars is sort of, going to briefly return to wrap up its main storyline. Maybe folks have an interest in Clone Wars related things again, and it's, getting people talking. But on the other hand, it's not totally surprising that people are doing this even all these years after, because look, EU fans, we want more content, right? And I think the fact that there are some folks that are in the EU camp who are a little hesitant about picking that up, maybe for EU fans who are less keen to sort of follow the new canon. There are, of course, many who follow both, and that's fantastic, right? But for EU folks who only want to read EU stories, it's kind of sad to think that they've been holding off, unsure whether or not this is actually part of their canon. Because again, like Lucasfilm has not provided much certainty around this, right? I mean, in addition to the really big grievance of decanonizing the EU, and moreover, at the time disallowing any sort of continued sort of like future development of that storyline along an alternate path, right? It's like among these major grievances, right? One of the more unfortunate things they did is to, again, leave a lot of ambiguity about things like Son of Dathomir, about their framework for determining which things from the now Legends timeline, right, they're also pulling into the new canon, and what that ultimately means for those EU stories. Do they remain EU? I mean, there are people who, for instance, who argue that the fact that, like Son of Dathomir, that the Filoni Clone Wars TV show is itself both part of the EU and new canon. A lot of people go, well, no, it was pulled into new canon, meaning it was taken away from the EU, so they don't think it's part of the EU anymore, right? I know there are a lot of very mixed views in the EU about the Filoni Clone Wars show, right? But for better or worse, guys, it's a part of the EU, right? So let's talk a little bit about why there's confusion. And hopefully, in talking about this, maybe clear a little bit of the confusion up. Hopefully, it's complicated. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that much good work here, but we'll see. And provide what I hope is a helpful framework for thinking through these things, right? Something that I wish Lucasfilm would do, but I think we can settle on something here. Maybe, yeah. We'll see how it goes. I have no idea. This is a tough one, right? And it's been. I guess the reason I wanted to do a video on this too was just to force myself to kind of organize thoughts around this, because I'll talk with folks and I'll throw out some arguments, and they still don't believe me. And I'm no authoritative source. I'm not associated with Lucasfilm, right? I'm just an old school EU fan who just realized at the time when it came out, great, this is part of the EU, and okay, I guess Lucasfilm wants it for their canon as well. No big deal, right? But you sometimes realize, hey, you gotta step back and remind yourself why you think things, right? Which is why it's great to debate. Which is why, by the way, I always love talking with fans of the new canon, and I'm really glad that a lot of them, check out this channel and check out our stuff at theexpandeduniverse.com, which I'll put a link to down below. If you haven't checked that out, please do. That's where I've been the last year or so, off YouTube and working on that website. But let's hit this up. Let's see if we can knock this out. So I think in the wake of the ambiguity, after the April sort of 2014 announcement, right, decanonizing the EU, I think one of the things that EU fans were hungry for was that certainty. And I think the thing they flocked to was the date itself, April 25th, 2014, right? So that this became kind of like the red letter mark, on either side of which we were able to determine whether something was part of the EU or part of the new canon. Basically, if it came out after April 25th, it was just going to be part of the new canon, right? In the way that, like, obviously, like Episode 7, is just unambiguously part of the new canon, right? No one argues that it's part of the EU, right? And Son of Dathomir, admittedly, was published a little after April 25th, 2014, right? And I think the fact that then Lucasfilm came along to say, oh yeah, this story, a direct adaptation of the Clone Wars story, is going to be part of the new canon, led a lot of people to think, oh, okay, well, gosh, I guess there must be something about that date that really matters, right? But I mean, off the bat, that's problematic, right? Because the Clone Wars TV show was also sort of, taken from the EU and distinctly also added to the Disney Star Wars new canon. So it's like, obviously the Clone Wars started in 2008, right? Well before the reboot. So off the bat, there's something about this date being the most operative thing that just doesn't really work, right? And the thing about Son of Dathomir is it's not the only EU thing that came after April 25th. There was another Dark Horse comic miniseries called Rebel Heist, which came just a little bit. I think it was finished I think it was in publication. I think it might have technically started before April 25th, but it certainly wasn't finished until after April 25th. At no point has Lucasfilm come along to say, oh yeah, well, we're adding that to our new canon, right? There's no explicit proclamation, right? It's an EU story. It was developed in the EU era. It was intended to be EU. It fits comfortably in the continuity of the EU. Lucasfilm, moreover, has not said anything about it. Therefore, it's part of the EU, right? But the thing about Son of Dathomir is, yeah, I mean, same thing, right? If the reboot had never happened, it would have very uncontroversially been part of the EU. It's just that Lucasfilm came along to say, we're adding it here as well. But what else? Legacy Volume 2. That wasn't finished being published until quite a ways after the April 25th decision. And again, at no point has Lucasfilm come along to say, this thing, which was intended to be EU, which was developed under EU, is now also going to be part of the new canon. They haven't, right? It's just, again, it's not a big deal. It's part of the EU, right? So already you're kind of seeing the thing that's not operative is the date. The thing that might be operative is what does Lucasfilm explicitly state, right? But here's what's so tricky, right? I mean, we've got lots of explicit proclamations about, the fate of the EU, and which things from the EU are also being added to the new canon. But the problem is, at least to my knowledge, right, there's no sort of corresponding official explicit proclamations that like you could find on StarWars.com stating things like, oh, well, because the Clone Wars and Son of Dathomir have been added to the new canon, they still retain status as EU products, right? Because there are some who, again, argue that like, oh, well, the EU haven't been sort of like added to new canon. Well, it's not part of the EU. And again, it's like, again, I know that like folks have really, mixed views about Filoni's Clone Wars in the EU community, but it's like, again, guys, for better or worse, it's part of the EU, right? It just also happens to have been plucked from the timeline to be distinctly added to the new canon timeline as well. Why is there still confusion? Even if we cleared this up. I think one of the other things people look for in the EU community for some amount of certainty, and this is true of folks in the new canon side as well, is Wikipedia. But you got to remember, folks, Wikipedia is not an authoritative source, right? It's a helpful source. It's a great resource. It's a great website, but it's not Lucasfilm, right? After the reboot, as you guys probably know, I'm sure you all check out Wikipedia, what they had to do was to make some determinations around which articles belong to which canon, right? In a lot of cases, like take the Luke Skywalker biography on Wikipedia, right? Well, they had to basically split it in two and create two versions. So now there's the canon Luke Skywalker biography and there's the Legends Luke Skywalker biography. But in the case of, say, something like Son of Dathomir or Clone Wars, right? The Clone Wars TV show, at least. It's part of both. They weren't going to go through the absurd step of creating an identical separate page just so that at the top there could be a canon tab here and then a Legends tab there. But I think the fact that, again, Wikipedia not being an authoritative Lucasfilm source, having made an editorial decision that works for that website, for their encyclopedia, right? I think a lot of folks have then used that to say, see, like, look, like Son of Dathomir, it says it's canon. It doesn't say Legends anywhere, right? But again, Wikipedia is not an authoritative source, right? There are more authoritative sources out there and better frameworks, and we'll summarize that in just a minute. This story just gets more and more complicated because a while back, I forget exactly when this happened, but I remember there was quite a scuttlebutt around it online at the time. When Marvel reprinted Son of Dathomir, it was the digital version that I think they initially put up with the Legends banner. And this created such confusion and such outrage. And I remember Pablo had to, it was either on Twitter or at a convention somewhere. I forget exactly where, but I remember this happening at the time. He had to get out there and say things like, oh, no, like that was a mistake. It's part of canon, right? Well, the thing is, like, they're both right, I mean, yeah, it could have the Legends banner, but, being that it's part of the new canon, and it doesn't need it either, right? But the thing is, like, as much as I disliked the term Legends when that was first used, right? Because again, it's too broad a brush. It packs too many things from the EU era into it. It's problematic, right? Putting that label aside, the literal label tag on a book or comic or something, guys, that's not authoritative. That's just a marketing tool. That's just something that Lucasfilm insists that the licensees use to distinguish their products on bookshelves. That's it. It is not the arbiter of canonicity or not. That's Lucasfilm itself, right? So again, don't look for that. And the reason why this is so important is that there are folks who make really absurd arguments, and even on the EU side, like hardcore EU fans who've started to tell me things like, "No, I don't think the Old Republic is EU." They go, "Well, why?" I mean, Lucasfilm has been explicit about this time and time again that the Old Republic is part of the EU. It is in no way part of the new canon. And they go, well, no, that can't be right because there's no Legends banner on the new expansions or on the occasional short stories. I mean, what's so cool about the Old Republic is it's really one of the only places where we're getting new EU content, even post 2014, right? But folks go, well, you know, I play the video game, I don't see the Legends banner anywhere. Again, guys, it's just a marketing tool, right? And if BioWare hasn't been asked to add Legends somewhere, who cares, right? The ultimate arbiter is Lucasfilm, right? And so, you know, don't put that much stock in this. But again, I can't judge too harshly because, look, I'm the first one to say, like, Lucasfilm, they ham-fisted that decanonization announcement in so many ways, and this is just, you know, among the very long list of ways. So I appreciate that, like, in the wake of that ambiguity, you know, folks are scrambling for certainty. I totally appreciate that, right? And I sort of think, that we can think through a couple of more or less hard and fast sort of frameworks for thinking through some of this nuance. But before I do, though, I want to kind of clear something up. So again, Son of Dathomir, you know, it was published after the decanonization decision, right? And was also explicitly stated by Lucasfilm to be part of their canon, right? Which is, you know, part of why it's part of their canon, but also part of the EU to the extent that it fits within the continuity. I want to be really careful there because there's some nuance that you could miss. What I'm not saying is that therefore anything post April 25th that just happens to fit into continuity that's part of the new canon is also part of the EU. You know, people make these arguments all the time. They go, you know, the Tarkin book, the Dark Disciple book, Lords of the Sith, Heir to the Jedi, right? They go, Heir to the Jedi, that was supposed to be part of an EU book trilogy, right? They go, why can't it be EU if parts of or chapters of it fit, right? And this is what distinguishes Son of Dathomir from these other things. Yes, all of these things were being, you know, were theoretically like in production prior to the decanonization, right? But Lucasfilm at no point, you know, sort of like, again, with Son of Dathomir, what did Lucasfilm do differently, right? They came in to say this EU thing, we're also adding this to the new canon, the way they did that with the Clone Wars, right? But the other crucial thing that we haven't talked about is the Disney story group. The Disney story group really at no point, as far as we can tell, you know, forced the Son of Dathomir story to change to adapt to fit the new canon storyline. It is a direct adaptation of, you know, what at the time was just an EU Clone Wars TV show. It wasn't changed. Yes, it was published after the publication date, but again, it's for all intents and purposes an EU story, right? So this is why it's EU and new canon, right? But Tarkin, you know, Heir to the Jedi, Dark Disciple, these are things that, yes, were in production, yes, have been explicitly stated by Disney to be part of the new canon, but were also altered by the Disney story group, right? I mean, John Ostrander has said this. You can Google Ostrander Dark Disciple. And he is very clear. He goes, look, credit where credit's due. He's like, great book, great story. He goes, honestly, I'm not entirely sure why I used Quinlan Voss, a character I created, because they kind of changed him. I mean, why not just have a new character, right? Yes, like this, you know, that story was theoretically at some point a direct adaptation of what would have been a EU Clone Wars TV show. He goes, but it changed. You know, Voss changed, right? It's no longer comfortably fitting in the EU continuity. So these are cases where, okay, great, like we've started to realize there's at least two really helpful parameters now for determining which things have these unique properties that Dathomir and Clone Wars share, and it's has the Disney story group altered the story to in some way fit with the new canon storyline explicitly, right? The way that they did with Tarkin and Dark Disciple and things like that, the way that they didn't do with Son of Dathomir. And has Lucasfilm ever come along to say we're explicitly adding this new canon? Those are the things I think that hopefully kind of clear this up and hopefully finally explain why it is that Son of Dathomir is indeed part of both. So if you're an EU fan who's read everything and are just waiting for Lucasfilm to produce more Legends and haven't read Son of Dathomir yet, you are in good luck, because guess what? You've got 4 comic books that make up that trade paperback that you can now pick up and read. And I hope you do so. I hope you enjoy it. And if you've read it, let me know what you think about it. Let me know what you think about these frameworks in general. Have you had these same questions? Have you had these conversations with others? I'd be curious to know how this has gone. All right, that's it for today, folks. Have a great one.